Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So the deadline for planes to have their altimeters upgraded so they're not susceptible to 5G interference from the C-band spectrum has passed, and thankfully it's passed quietly. Be right back. Thanks for joining me, Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So this was something that was a concern. It's still a concern. And it's not something that's been completely addressed yet, but like I said, there was a July 1st deadline for airplanes to have their altimeters upgraded so that they're not susceptible to 5G interference that would be in the C-band spectrum. C-band spectrum is close to where some of these older altimeters operate in. I could probably maybe the newer ones as well, but the newer ones are better able to ignore or not see this interference. So maybe they're shielded better. So this is something that was a concern when C-band was first coming out and could be used for 5G because of how close these were operating. They're not overlapping, but they're pretty close. In fact, I did a broadcast. I linked to several articles that I'm going to show here in the description of this video, including a broadcast that I did back when this was first being discussed. So if you want more details on C-band spectrum and what was going on at the time, this controversy, you can watch that as well. But so you see here, 5G threat to airplanes quietly recedes. So not being talked about a lot as much as it was then, but there's still an issue. And the Department of Transportation has issued a notice to operators, those operating planes in the United States, that they need to put some limitations on that, which we'll look at as well. So see here, the July deadline for U.S. airline industry came and went with not much happened, which again, that's a good thing. We don't want anything happening from that. We're not aware of any disruption specifically related to 5G over the weekend, wrote Ian Petchenek, Director of Communications for Flight Radar 24, on Monday in response to questions from Light Reading. Petchenek noted the flight tracking companies does not specifically collect data on the types of issues that delay flights. So I don't know if that really tells us anything. They don't, if there were delayed flights, it wouldn't probably tell them that it was due to a C-band issue. So regardless, the situation is remarkable considering warnings of major disruptions, chaos, and the possibility that nation's commerce will grind to a halt if 5G gets too close to airplanes in the U.S. So there's some history here. I think that might be mentioned in this article, and if not, I'll go through it. So broadly, the high-stakes standoff between U.S. wireless industry and the airline industry, which kicked into high gear just over a year ago, appears to be something that both sides now mostly want to forget. Representatives from a wide range of airline companies, agencies, and trade associations, including the Department of Transportation, JetBlue, and the Airline Pilots Association, did not respond to questions from Light Reading about the number of flights affected by 5G over the 4th of July holiday in the U.S. So I guess they asked whether there were any issues. I think there probably aren't. I think they would have found out if there were. So I think this is the kind of thing where they're just being overly cautious. There probably were not any issues. And airplanes have been told that they have to operate under certain limitations, as we'll see in a minute. It mentions here, one airline did say something. We expect minimal operational impact, according to Delta Airlines spokesperson. Mentions here airplanes stalling. At issue are fears by the airline industry that 5G transmissions in C-band spectrum might interfere with aircraft altimeters near some U.S. airports. Such altimeters can be essential to safe aircraft landings in rain and other conditions that can affect visibility. So again, the weather has something to do with it, as to whether they're going to be using this particular radar to do that. In late 2021, and by the way that works is it shoots radar at the ground and it kind of tells the plane how close they are to the ground. Obviously in bad weather conditions, you need that. In late 2021, just before Verizon was scheduled to switch on its 5G network and its new C-band spectrum holdings, so again, this is late 2021, the U.S. airlines industry conducted a major public relations campaign to stall that rollout. Major disruptions to passenger air travel, commercial transport, and critical helicopter operations can be expected from the rollout of 5G, a group of airline executives warned near the end of 2021. After some very public debate on the topic, Verizon and AT&T agreed to delay their C-band 5G rollouts near some airports until July 1 to give the airline industry time to update some aircraft altimeters to ones that wouldn't be affected by 5G. So there were already altimeters that were, again, shielded well, whatever it is, that are not a problem, but there's a lot of older ones that are out there. However, as the deadline approached, some Biden administration officials worried that the airline industry wasn't retrofitting aircraft fast enough. There's a real risk of delays or cancellations, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg warned in June. This represents one of the biggest, probably the biggest, foreseeable problems affecting performance this summer. But Buttigieg said the July 1 deadline would not change. So the deadline is still there, has not been met, as we'll see. Earlier this year, Delta's altimeter supplier informed the company that due to roadblocks within its manufacturing supply chain, it would not have enough radio altimeters for Delta's entire fleet to meet the July 1 deadline. The company has declined to name its supplier. By July 1, Delta expected around 190 aircraft to still need altimeter retrofitting. That includes all Airbuses, A220s, most A319s, A320s, some A321s. Delta's aircraft fleet totals around 900. As it works to upgrade those remaining aircraft throughout the summer, Delta said it would assign affected Airbus aircraft away from airports that might require altimeter-assisted operations. If a flight is affected by 5G, the airline said it would delay or cancel the flight and offer options for rebooking. So that could obviously be a situation where it might cause a problem. And as far as directing away from airports, maybe they're talking about Seattle or somewhere it rains a lot, or they have other issues where they might need this more so than others. It says here, Delta isn't alone. JetBlue didn't respond to questions from Light Reading, but company officials told the Wall Street Journal that it would retrofit 17 smaller Airbus jets by October, with possible limited impact to some flights in Boston. American Southwest, Alaska, Frontier, and United all told the Associated Press that their fleets have upgraded altimeters that are protected from 5G interference. So it sounds like those airlines maybe are 100% upgraded now. And the 5G information website from the FAA shows that all U.S. aircraft and airports are approved to land, including the Airbus models mentioned by Delta, as still needing retrofits. That's interesting because there is something from the DOT here that makes it sound like there are limitations. We'll look at that in a minute. So this was from June 2nd. FAA asked for info on possible 5G interference. So the FAA was trying to, this was just last month. They're trying to get as much information as they can to see if there's interference happening. The FAA is asking aircraft manufacturers, operators, and companies that build radio altimeters to submit feedback on altimeter design and performance near 5G wireless broadband towers, now that those towers have been out there and operating. And again, some of these, providers like Verizon, AT&T have held back on maybe transmitting near airports or reducing the power near airports, and that is now, they don't have to do that now, as of July 1. Now, whether they've upped their power or anything, I don't know. The FAA issued a special airworthiness information bulletin on May 24th, soliciting information on altimeter design and functionality, specifics on deployment and usage of radio altimeters in aircraft, and asking stakeholders to test and assess their equipment in conjunction with federal authorities. We request that radio altimeter manufacturers submit receiver radio frequency sensitivity, interference tolerance, masks, and baseline operational specifications for each model number in production or still in use, and approximate numbers of each radio altimeter model currently in service in the U.S. The FAA makes 22 specific recommendations in that, including altimeter manufacturers are also asked to report any instances of erroneous altimeter performance to the FAA and FCC. They're asked to collaborate with aircraft manufacturers on design changes and issue guidance to operators on potential retrofit plans for radio altimeters susceptible to harmful interference. Aircraft builders should submit the number of each model of altimeter installed in each aircraft currently in service in the U.S., according to the SAIB. They also should communicate with radio altimeter suppliers and the FAA to identify susceptibility of certain equipment to C-band emissions. Aircraft makers are also asked to test the effects of loss of function and erroneous or misleading radio altimeter data from potential harmful interference caused by C-band, and evaluate the potential for harmful interference on aircraft in the manufacturer's fleet based on aircraft architecture and radio altimeter integration. So it would have been good if they had asked for a lot of this stuff a year ago. And hopefully airlines and manufacturers are looking at this. Operators should ensure pilots are aware of potential degradation of radio altimeter capabilities and any means to compensate for in-flight radio altimeter anomalies. Operators and pilots who experience radio altimeter anomalies should notify air traffic control as soon as practical. Yeah. So Obviously, again, it would have been better had they issued this much earlier, but hopefully some of this was being worked on in the background anyway. Here you see an Inside Towers. U.S. holds firm on July 1 5G upgrade, as we saw. U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg warned Friday of potential delays starting July 1 for airplanes that have not yet upgraded their radio altimeters to address potential 5G C-band interference. He urged airlines to adjust their flight schedules if necessary, reported Reuters, and we saw where Delta was doing that. More than 80% of the domestic fleet serving U.S. airports have been updated, so that means probably somewhere around 20% is not, according to Buttigieg. However, he wrote in a letter to Airlines for America, we continue to see a significant number of aircraft still awaiting retrofit, including many operated by foreign air carriers. This means on bad weather, low visibility days in particular, there could be increased delays and cancellations. So again, that would be where airlines are going to be trying not to operate those planes that don't have the upgraded altimeters. Buttigieg urged airlines who will be flying without the updated equipment to act now to adjust your schedules proactively. Carriers should consider how many of their aircraft still need to be retrofitted when setting and adjusting schedules to avoid causing consumers to rely on unrealistic published schedule to their detriment. He said passengers must not bear the brunt of any airline's inability to equip sufficient aircraft to be able to operate safely in the 5G C-band environment. So the onus has kind of shifted, in my opinion, from the wireless carriers to the airplanes, air carriers. They had gotten the wireless carriers again to kind of stall it at all. I mean, really, at the end of last year, I think they agreed to hold off until February of 2023, if I remember, and then limited operations after that. And they voluntarily said, okay, well, we'll be careful operating around airports and until July 1 to give the airlines time to make these changes. But now July 1 is passed, and the airlines have not completely upgraded their fleet. So it looks like, again, the onus is on them now. And you can see that here also in this this notice here. So this was just released. It's effective July 1st until further notice. 5G C-band transport commuter airplanes in the contiguous U.S. The FAA has placed limitations on all transport and commuter category airplanes equipped with a radio altimeter that are not radio altimeter tolerant. In other words, they do not demonstrate the tolerances specified in figures 1 and 2 below. The FAA determined that radio altimeters cannot be relied upon to perform their intended function if they experience interference from wireless broadband operations in the 3.7 to 3.98 gigahertz frequency band, or 5G C-band. That's the spectrum for 5G. Radio altimeters anomalies that are undetected by the automation or pilot, particularly close to the ground, for example, landing flare, could lead to loss of continued safe flight and landing. Additionally, radio altimeter anomalies could lead to increased flight crew workload and flight crew desensitization to warnings. So the altimeters operate at 4.2 and above. So there's still concern, I guess, and they say that they've determined that these altimeters cannot be relied upon. Now, I don't know if that's based on what we were just reading, where they were asking for information from these altimeter companies, or if they'd done their own testing. But again, they're saying that they can't be relied upon. And what they're saying here is a radio altimeter tolerant airplane is one for which the radio altimeter, as installed, demonstrates the tolerances specified below. And that would be tolerance to radio altimeter interference for the fundamental emissions, and that would be emissions within the C-band spectrum, 3.7 to 3.98 gigahertz, and then tolerance to radio altimeter interference for spurious emissions, and that would be, let's say, emissions that are, it could be from C-band that something's gone wrong, or from some other interference that's in the actual spectrum that the altimeters use, which they're calling spurious emissions in the 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz, or at or above the PSD curve threshold specified in Figure 2. So they have these figures. These are the figures they're talking about here on that. It says the Transport Commuter AD prohibits the following operations in the contiguous U.S. Instrument landings, and again, this is why weather is important. So I don't know what a plane does if weather pops up. I don't know how they're going to try to rearrange all these flights based on this, but it says it prohibits following operations in the contiguous U.S. Instrument landing system, instrument approach procedures, SACAT, et cetera, these things here. automatic landing operations, manual flight control guidance system operations to landing head-up display or touchdown operation, use of enhanced flight vision system to touchdown under 14 CFR, so that whatever that regulation is. So it sounds to me like it's, if the weather is clear and you don't need instruments, you're good. If it's instrument flight rules of some kind or maybe specific ones, then you're not supposed to operate if you don't have the upgraded altimeters. So obviously that could cause a significant delay, and I think it's going to cause a lot of confusion for airlines as they try to figure out where they're going to operate these planes and how. So you think about that. You're trying to manage all of your planes, and where do you send the ones that don't have the upgraded altimeters, and how do you plan that out? How do you, I guess, again, maybe you're sending them to places that have very little rain, and normally you can operate without instruments. So anyway, hopefully later this year, everybody will be upgraded and it won't be an issue, but 5G, this has been a concern. 5G, a lot of people have, there's a lot of controversy around. A lot of folks have, thoughts that it's caused COVID or, has got other harmful health effects. So you'll hear a lot about that. I'll probably have a few comments on this video at some point in the future about that. People who watch this and say, oh, it's causing cancer or something like that. So we don't know. I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's been proven, but you never know. And again, it is an issue for those that are operating airplanes. So hopefully, again, they're just being very cautious and we don't need to worry. The flying public does not need to worry about this, but just wanted to give you an update on that. And again, there's a link below with when I did a broadcast when this first surfaced back about a year ago, I think it was. So thanks for joining me. If this was interesting, if you give me a like on the video, I'd appreciate it. And if you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when I'm live. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time for Broadband Deployment News. Take care. Bye-bye.